Syracuse gets another commit, and another big one could be on the way soon.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, whether you're watching on YouTube, you're listening on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, it's all things Syracuse football. We'll discuss some sleeper transfer portal additions that Syracuse made this offseason. We'll also talk about CBS Sports' most impactful transfers in the ACC and what they had to say about Syracuse football. But we're going to start the podcast with a 2026 recruiting update because the Orange just landed another commit in their upcoming class, and another one could be on the way soon. All that and more here on today's show. Now, before we get to everything, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So last weekend, Syracuse football had a big official visit list, a lot of big names coming in, headlined by four-star corner C.J. Hester. Let's hope that Syracuse can gain some momentum with him. Right now, it still seems like Florida is the front runner for C.J. Hester. But with the big official visit weekend, I think myself, along with many of you all, were wondering, was Syracuse going to get any commits out of it? And, well, they have. They got their first one from that weekend, specifically 2026 offensive lineman Braden Charney, who committed to Syracuse yesterday afternoon. It was actually right after I recorded the podcast about Carmelo Anthony being only rated as the sixth best best one-and-done player in the history of college basketball, according to College Basketball Report. But let's talk about Braden Charney here for just a moment. Then we'll also discuss the effects on the 2026 recruiting class, Cameron Wilson, and also later on Messiah Hampton. So Braden Charney is from South Florida, and he's listed at 6'6", 285 pounds. He's an offensive lineman. He is a 3-star recruit on 24/7 Sports. I did not see him rated anywhere else on the major recruiting websites. That's ESPN, On3, and Rivals. Charney said all the right things when he was speaking with Rivals. He said, quote, "I committed to Syracuse because of the feeling I got the minute I stepped on campus." And then he went on to say great things about his relationship with head coach Fran Brown and also seeing the Dome. So awesome. Syracuse football gets another commitment. And with Charney's commitment, Syracuse football is up to 16 verbal commits in the class of 2026. The class overall on 24/7 Sports is in the top 25 as of this recording, which is June 10th at 2:39 p.m. Eastern. So that's subject to change, but it's 22nd overall. That's pretty damn good. And Syracuse has 5 offensive line commits of those 16 players, headlined by 4-star offensive tackle, also from Florida, Javion Cooper. Here's some more 2026 recruiting news, some good news, and also, some bad news, all right? So you got Cameron Wilson, a 6'5", 210-pound edge rusher. He is a 4-star recruit on multiple major recruiting services. He is currently a Syracuse verbal commit. However, multiple insiders, including On3's Steve Wiltfong, now expect that Cameron Wilson is going to flip his verbal commitment from Syracuse to Nebraska. He officially visited Nebraska last weekend, and given the insiders saying that they think that he is going to flip from Syracuse to Nebraska, I think we can all assume that that official visit went quite well for Cameron Wilson. So that's the bad news with him. The good news with Cameron Wilson is that he is scheduled to officially visit Syracuse this upcoming weekend per 24/7 Sports. So that'll give the Orange the opportunity to perhaps regain the momentum and re-solidify the verbal commitment of four-star edge rusher Cameron Wilson. But it's definitely a situation now that we have to monitor, and hopefully he decides to stay with Syracuse. Obviously, even if he does decide to flip to Nebraska or any other school for that matter, there's still a long ways away from signing day. That's all the way in December. So could be a long journey with a guy like Cameron Wilson. Now let's get to Messiah Hampton. He is currently one of the top receivers overall in the 2026 recruiting class, a consensus four-star recruit. I believe Rivals has him as the 65th overall rated player in the country. 65. That's really, really elite. As I said, consensus four-star recruit. He is the number one player in the state of New York. Well, Messiah Hampton, for those that might have missed the episode with 24/7 Sports Syracuse insider Mike McAllister, it was released last Thursday evening. Hampton is making his decision on June 13th. So that's 3 days from now at the time of this recording. That is literally this upcoming Friday. The good news with Messiah Hampton is that it appears Syracuse has a lot of momentum to ultimately prevail for the four-star wide receiver, because last Thursday, Rivals recruiting analyst John Garcia, he said that he expects Syracuse to land at least one of four-star wide receiver Messiah Hampton or five-star Calvin Russell out of Miami, Florida. Garcia wrote, quote, "We're calling the shot for the Orange to snag one of these class headliners in the coming weeks." The class headliners being either Messiah Hampton or Calvin Russell, like I just mentioned. Furthermore, John Garcia from Rivals wrote, quote, "Messiah Hampton is a Rochester native, some 90 minutes from campus, and he has felt the press from Brown and company since they took over in Central New York. Oregon and Miami are the top contenders working on an upset ahead of the June 13th decision date." The key words there are working on an upset, because initially when you might have heard that quote from me, it came from John Garcia over at Rivals again, you might be thinking that Oregon and Miami are the favorites, that they're going back and forth here. But actually, based on what John Garcia is saying, it appears that Syracuse is the favorite for Messiah Hampton and that Oregon and Miami are the underdogs trying to make up ground. Ultimately, we're going to find out one way or another on Friday. And even then, whether it's good news for Syracuse or bad news for Syracuse, there's still a long time until signing day once again. But you'd rather have the verbal commitment than not. In fact, most of the time, recruits will stay with their initial commitment that they make. But there's just so many recruits out there in the country that commit to these schools that just on sheer volume, you're going to have a lot of players ultimately flip commits. But it's looking pretty good for Messiah Hampton. I thought for a while that Oregon was the favorite. I do believe there is one crystal ball prediction on 24/7 Sports for Oregon to land Messiah Hampton. But based on what John Garcia is saying, Syracuse appears to be the front runner. So hopefully on Friday, everything works out for Syracuse and the number one player in the state of New York. So that is your 2026 Syracuse football recruiting update. The Orange securing their 16th verbal commit of the class in Braden Charney, an offensive lineman. Cameron Wilson now predicted to flip from Syracuse to Nebraska, but the Orange are favored to land four-star wide receiver Messiah Hampton. Now coming up, we'll transition to talking about the transfer portal a little bit. CBS Sports' most impactful transfers in the ACC and what they had to say about Syracuse. That's coming up next here on the Locked On Syracuse podcast. The NBA Finals are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. At the time of this recording, it is 1-1 in the NBA Finals. I still think that the Oklahoma City Thunder are going to ultimately prevail in this series, but hey, Indiana, they've been underdogs before, and they seem to relish being the underdog. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. New to FanDuel? Well, it's the perfect time to sign up. You can head to FanDuel.com right now and place your first $5 bet. And guess what? If that first $5 bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. We left off discussing some Syracuse football 2026 recruiting updates. Now let's transition to discussing the transfer portal. So from recruiting out of high school to recruiting out of players from college, I guess. And CBS Sports released their ACC football most impactful transfers for this upcoming season. It was written by Will Backus last week, and I apologize. We were going to discuss this article earlier in the week, but then College Basketball Report released their rankings of the best one and done players in the history of college basketball, putting Carmelo Anthony at 6. So we had to discuss that on yesterday's podcast. And hey, you can check that out when you're done watching or listening to this podcast. So now let's get to the article itself. And Will Backus from CBS Sports, he gave one transfer for every ACC team. And for Syracuse, he named Steve Angeli as Syracuse's most impactful transfer for this upcoming season. For those that may have forgotten or need a refresher, Angeli is a quarterback coming from Notre Dame, and he was a spring transfer portal addition. And we have plenty of content here on Locked On Syracuse talking more specifically about Steve Angeli, and we will have plenty of more content talking about Steve Angeli over the course of this offseason. And just to tease a few podcasts later on down the line, we will have a quarterback positional preview podcast. I can't tell you exactly when that's going to be. Maybe it'll be tomorrow, right? Maybe it'll be tomorrow. So that's just a quick refresher. He named Steve Angeli as Syracuse's most impactful transfer. And here is what Will Backus of CBS Sports had to say. He wrote, quote, Angeli didn't play much at Notre Dame, but he did flash whenever he touched the field. He provided valuable minutes when Riley Leonard briefly exited the Fighting Irish's college football playoff game against Penn State by throwing for 44 yards and engineering a field goal drive at the end of the first half. He will have to beat out Rickie Collins for Syracuse's starting job. Here are my thoughts on this, and feel free to comment in the comment section below right now who you think Syracuse's most impactful transfer will be for this upcoming season. I don't think it's necessarily controversial to say that it's going to be Steve Angeli, and Will Backus overall, he had the right idea when discussing Syracuse's quarterback, because after all, it's a quarterback. The quarterback is the most valuable position on the field. They have the most influence in a game more often than not compared to any other position on the field here. But I think that Will Backus kind of contradicts himself by calling Steve Angeli Syracuse's most impactful transfer. And the reason why I'm saying that is because at the end of the article, he says, I think what many of us know, which is that he's going to have to beat out Rickie Collins for the starting job. Now, I believe Steve Angeli will ultimately prevail and be Syracuse's starting quarterback in week 1 against Tennessee in late August. And comment your thoughts in the comment section below right now. Who do you think is going to be Syracuse's starting quarterback? I think most of you believe that it'll also be Steve Angeli, but keep in mind, Rickie Collins is there. Rickie Collins committed to Syracuse back in December. He's transferring from LSU, and kind of like Steve Angeli, how Angeli isn't coming to Syracuse to ride the bench. He's transferring from Notre Dame. He could have rode the bench at Notre Dame. Why is he going to go to Syracuse and ride the bench? Right? Same thing with Rickie Collins coming from LSU. I mean, he would have sat behind Garrett Nussmeier for another year. You think he's just going to roll over and let Steve Angeli have the starting quarterback job? No, this is going to be a quarterback competition here. So if we don't know that Steve Angeli, if we don't know for sure that he's going to be the starting quarterback, it's hard for me to sit here and say that I agree that he is Syracuse's most impactful transfer, because I don't know how impactful he's actually going to be, because we don't know if he's actually going to see the field. So there's really two ways to go about it. Number one, you can pick a non-quarterback that Syracuse got from the transfer portal. And in the third segment of this podcast, we are going to discuss a few sleepers for who could be Syracuse's most impactful transfer this upcoming season. But the other way to go about it, and I think it's the smarter way to go about it, is just to pick both quarterbacks and say in tandem that whoever wins the starting job, whether it's Steve Angeli or Rickie Collins, is going to be Syracuse's most impactful transfer. That's my thoughts on it. I'd love to hear from you in the comments section below who you believe is Syracuse's most impactful transfer. I think ultimately it's not necessarily Steve Angeli or Rickie Collins. It's whoever wins that starting quarterback job. Comment your thoughts in the comments section below. Coming up, we'll discuss other players who can be highly impactful for Syracuse, who they got in the transfer portal this offseason. So that's coming up next here on Locked On Syracuse. If not the quarterbacks, who is Syracuse's most impactful transfer for the 2025 college football season? So it's not Steve Angeli. It's not Rickie Collins. You don't believe it's one of those guys. Who could it be for Syracuse football? I think a lot of you will say that it'll be wide receiver Jonte Cook from Texas and Washington, 2023 5-star recruit. Hasn't exactly lived up to his potential just yet, but hopefully with Syracuse, he finds new life and he could be an electric talent for the Orange this upcoming season, playing alongside Darrell Gill, who's set to have a big third season in college football. So you could easily argue that it's Jonte Cook, or maybe you could say that it's someone on Syracuse's offensive line. Remember, earlier this offseason, we were talking about this a lot, that the Orange had to replace basically its entire starting offensive line. In fact, with now Mark Petrie unfortunately out for the season, I think they have to replace the entirety of it. I think they're going to have 5 new starters for this upcoming season. Maybe instead, I think Demetrius Weatherspoon actually might get a starting spot, but who knows? Maybe he won't. He's a returning tackle. Maybe he gets the starting job. Maybe he doesn't. And the reason why I say that is because Syracuse went out and they got 5 offensive linemen in the transfer portal this offseason. They got Naquil Beatran from Alabama. They got Austin Collins from Louisville. Zach Rice from North Carolina, Syracuse's other former 5-star recruit on the team. TJ Ferguson from Florida State and Cam Pringle from South Carolina. I think that the offensive line battles this offseason are going to be fascinating, because I'll be honest with you, we've done a few podcasts trying to predict what Syracuse's starting offensive line is going to be, but it's kind of hard to predict it, to be honest with you. I don't know. They have some returning players, but of the returning players, who's ready to see an elevated or more playing time, right? Because they didn't really start last season with the exception of Demetrius Witherspoon. And of the new guys that were brought in, okay, well, who is certainly capable of starting and who's someone that it's just never going to really work out for him? I guess we will find out, right? But I want to go over some sleepers here. 3 sleeper transfers for Syracuse football. These are some players that I don't think we've really talked about enough here on this podcast, and maybe they're not really talked about overall here in the Syracuse landscape. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to discuss these 3 guys. Number 1, David Reese, an edge rusher from Cal. Fadil Diggs is gone. Fadil Diggs was one of, if not Syracuse's best defensive players a year ago. He was an edge rusher. He ran out of eligibility, and guess what? He was so good that he was picked in the 7th round of the NFL draft by the New Orleans Saints. And no, I am not saying that sarcastically. You have to be pretty damn good to be drafted into the NFL. So who is Fadil Diggs' replacement? Well, as of right now, it appears that it's going to be 8th-year senior. Yes, David Reese is entering his 8th year. That it's going to be him. He is going to be the replacement for Fadil Diggs. And here's the thing with David Reese. I don't necessarily think he's as good as Fadil Diggs, but I do think he could be average to above average for Syracuse this upcoming season because he has 11 sacks over the past 2 seasons, both of which came in a power conference. In 2023 at Cal, they were in the Pac-12. Pac-12 was still a thing in 2023, so he had 5.5 sacks there, and then he goes to the ACC with Cal, and he's got 4.5 sacks. David Reese, I think, is going to get a lot of playing time this offseason. I think he could be one of Syracuse's most impactful transfer additions for this upcoming year. Next up is Chris Peal, a corner from Georgia, a 2023 4-star recruit that was, you ready for it? Primarily recruited by Fran Brown. Now, for those that may have forgotten, it's okay. I'm here. This is Locked On Syracuse. Right? Fran Brown, before coming to Syracuse, was the defensive backs coach at Georgia and the #1 recruiter in the nation. So he was out doing a ton of visits, seeing high school kids when he was there at Georgia. He still does them, obviously, with Syracuse. So he was the primary recruiter for Chris Peal. Now, at Georgia, it's Georgia. He just didn't really see the field a whole lot. They are one of the top teams in the country in a year in and year out basis. They have 4- and 5-star talent across the board. But with Syracuse, he's going to have an opportunity for significant playing time. And I've brought it up before that Syracuse's cornerback room is very young and inexperienced. I didn't call it bad. I called it young and inexperienced. That doesn't mean bad. Again, okay? Demetrius Samuel, he might be the team's #1 corner. 4-star recruit, consensus. I get it. I think he might have I said on Friday that he's the most likely Syracuse player, in my opinion, to break out. I said that on Friday. He's going to be the team's #1 corner. He's a true freshman. Your second corner is true sophomore Davian Kerr. So Chris Peal, in my opinion, he might not project to be a starting corner right now, but I do think he's going to have a shot to earn significant playing time this upcoming season. Feel free to agree or disagree with me right now in the comments section below. I do think we are maybe sleeping on Chris Peal just because he didn't really play a whole lot over at Georgia. Now at Syracuse, he's going to get more of an opportunity for significant playing time. And then you got Tyshawn Russell, a South Carolina wide receiver. He's kind of like Jackson Meeks. Not necessarily in how they play wide receiver, but in terms of career arc heading into Syracuse. Now, it should be noted that Jackson Meeks was at Georgia for longer than Tyshawn Russell was at South Carolina. So Tyshawn Russell, I believe, has multiple years of eligibility. When Jackson Meeks came to Syracuse, he only had 1 more year of eligibility. But I do think there is potential for Tyshawn Russell to have that type of impact of Jackson Meeks from a year ago. Think about it this way. They were both 3-star recruits at SEC schools. No, these were not your blue chip recruits. These were 3-star guys. Russell was in 2023. Jackson Meeks was in 2021. Neither did a whole lot with their respective team. Jackson Meeks at Georgia was really just a depth guy. Tyshawn Russell, same deal. Jackson Meeks came to Syracuse on the outside looking in for significant playing time. Go back and rewind the tape from a year ago. Zeed Haynes Mari Hatcher and Justice Ross Simmons. It looked like those were going to be the top 3 wide receivers for Syracuse football. And then you can kind of start talking about a guy like Jackson Meeks. Well, I see something similar with Tyshawn Russell, because when you think about Syracuse's wide receivers for this upcoming season and who's going to get significant playing time, we can all expect that Darryl Gill will get significant playing time. Jonte Cook, obviously. Umari Hatcher and Justice Ross Simmons, they're still with Syracuse. So where does Tyshawn Russell fit in? Oh, by the way, you got 4-star wide receiver from last year, Emmanuel Ross, who is a breakout candidate for this team. It doesn't seem like Tyshawn Russell is going to see the field a whole lot, but he has been praised a lot by head coach Fran Brown. He has spoken very highly of him. And so that's why I think we might be sleeping on him. I don't necessarily believe that he's going to get significant playing time right away, but it could be a similar deal to Jackson Meeks, where Jackson Meeks didn't start seeing the field a whole lot until week 3. That was when Zede Haynes just was out for the rest of the season with personal issues. Maybe that's something or maybe something similar can happen with a guy like Tyshawn Russell, where in the beginning of the season, he doesn't see the field a whole lot, but by week 3, week 4, maybe a receiver goes down, he gets on the field and does well for Syracuse football. Who do you think we're sleeping on from the transfer portal? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Just give me 1 or 2 players you believe could outperform expectations for this team this upcoming season. Now, as far as what is coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the future, I guess for tomorrow, barring any significant breaking news out there, we will probably do our first football positional preview. Thursday, I don't believe we will do a podcast, but on Friday, Messiah Hampton, like we talked about in the first segment of this podcast, he is committing on that day. So whether it's good news or bad news, we will react to it here on Locked On Syracuse in a full podcast. Plus, there's also Poll Friday, which, again, it's in the name, it's Poll Friday. It's going to be on Friday. But we've done Poll Friday on Saturday before. We've done Poll Friday on Thursday before. So we might have to move that to Saturday. But that's what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the future. And thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. For your second listen, you can check out the Locked On Portal Show with football recruiting expert Brian Smith, who's got the latest rumors and signings each and every day. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. And you can find the Portal Podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse, and I will see you all again soon.